So, American news media has been filled the last few months with the tragic stories of several college athletes who died by suicide. Before this, I know mental health was in the spotlight, but now so even more. We've talked about mental health in many episodes, just to name a few. 139 and 140, we interviewed Lindsay Fennelly. 144, Nate and I had a conversation around coaches' mental health. And in 232 and 233, we spoke with Dr. Bruce Perry, the world's leading trauma psychiatrist, and Megan Bartlett. It's something we come back to every few months to discuss, and that's because Nate and I have really tried to focus our research and study into what we can do to better support and strengthen the mental health of our athletes. And what we've learned is this, at least one of the big solutions to this mental health crisis, this growing problem, is the relationship of a coach and a player. That can be very powerful, as well as the culture of a team. Community is very, very powerful. Now, in today's episode, we're going to be interviewing Jessica Renney, the co-founder of Hone Athletics and a trained psychotherapist. She's going to tell us a little bit about Hone and what they've learned through their data collection about what is arguably one of the most effective solutions towards addressing this crisis in sports. So, welcome to the Coaching Culture Podcast. I'm JP Nerbin, the founder of TOC Culture Consulting. I'm here with my friend and co-host Nate Sanderson. We at TOC are all about helping leaders implement systems and strategies to improve their team's culture. This podcast is where we continue to learn more about how to do that. We interview coaches, thought leaders, scientists, anybody really who will talk to us that we know has something to teach us. And then we share it with you. And here's the cool thing. People like M McGowan 33 think this podcast is pretty good. He left a review on iTunes saying a must-listen podcast. Absolutely one of the best podcasts out there for leadership in general. And a lot of the content is basketball driven, but you can apply these concepts in any work environment that requires leadership. Keep up the great content. Well, M. McGowan, send us an email. I've got some free stuff for you, books, online courses. And the rest of you listeners, if you haven't already, please leave us a review wherever you listen to podcasts. And if you'd like to learn more about TOC Culture Consulting, head on over to tocculture.com, where you can subscribe to our weekly newsletter and get a load of PDFs that will help you to build your culture. I'm going to shut up now. Here is the first part of our conversation with Jessica. Jessica, welcome to the podcast.
Awesome. Thanks so much for having me.
It's great to have you here. This has been a long time coming, and you have been impactful in our work over the last kind of 6 to 9 months. So it's been something that I wanted to, obviously bring you on as the CEO and co-founder of Hone to talk about your mission, your work, and some of the amazing things that you're learning in the world of sports, in particular mental health in sports. So as we kind of get started here, I know we're going to talk a lot about mental health in sports, but I want to start with just getting some basic understanding of Hone, the company that you started, and what is Hone?
Yeah, absolutely. So Hone is an app-based dashboard for our users and a web-based platform for coaches. And what it does is it's asking our athletes 7 different questions once a week that we know impact athlete mental health. Once they respond or answer those questions, their results are anonymously, yes, I said anonymous, I'll say it again, anonymously sent back to the coach. So now the coach has a better understanding of his or her wellness and can make those strategic coaching decisions with wellness in mind and a part of the conversation.
Yeah, and obviously mental health has become a huge talking point, especially in the last month with some of the really sad events in the States in college athletics. But this has always been something you've been working at for some time. Mm-hmm. So kind of like, what's your story? Like, why did you start Hone?
Yeah. I never, ever thought I'd be working in athletics ever. So how about we start there? I'm trained as a psychotherapist. I'm a certified Canadian psychotherapist, and working with individuals who suffer from or live with different acute mental health issues. That was kind of my early on career. And when I moved to Calgary and met Paula McQuaid, one of the most brilliant therapists I know, she and I both were really interested in kind of the underserved component to athletics in terms of mental health. We saw our athletes being tremendously served when it comes to their physicality and developing kind of different things that we know are really important to athletics. However, we weren't seeing them get the support they needed when it came to mental health. So we founded a company called Mindful Athletics, and we started doing in-person presentations with different teams, with coaches, with parents, just around how we can honor and I really identify and honor our mental health and how we support it. And then probably this is pre-pandemic. This is before the pandemic hit. I can't take credit for us coming up with a technology solution before the pandemic, but I guess it was good timing in a sense. We launched Hone 15 days before the world of sport actually shut down. Everyone has a COVID story, right? That's our COVID story. And we really kind of wanted to develop that technology solution that would further our reach and our capacity to work with athletes and coaches and teams and really bring mental health into not just the conversation, but into the game in a really sustainable, performance-based way. And that was 2 years ago. We hustled our way and really kind of brought on those early adopters and are kind of situated in a really good place now where we're working with quite a few different athletic teams, associations, and leagues here in Canada, as well as the high performance part of Hockey Canada and their teams. We've been mandated in the OHL, the CSSHL, with more of those kind of announcements coming soon, which is fantastic. And I have also decided to kind of look at different subgroups that need that support and really wanted to take this approach into the corporate world and just launched Hone Work Life.
One of the things you just said there that I kind of want to explore, which is that you didn't think you'd end up working in sports. You've got your father is an interesting person for sure. Mm-hmm. He's got a very interesting background, and I believe that's probably what you meant by that answer. Why don't you tell that story? Because I think I've heard a little bit of it, and it's pretty impactful.
Yeah, absolutely. So both my mom and my dad are coaches, and my dad probably a little bit. Well, not probably, is a little bit better known than my mom. But I was raised, being around sport, being around high performing athletes, and being around coaches and really just took quite a interest in kind of the culture and the environment that were around these kind of incredible athletes. And, my dad kind of hustled his way through different leagues and ended up coaching in the NHL for 13 years and then went on to work in Hockey Canada and kind of leading the charge there at Hockey Canada. So it's been something that's I just can't get away from it, JP. Maybe that means that I'm not meant to be away from it. So here I am.
Well, you mentioned this as a tool for coaches, and I wonder, just sort of broadly speaking, you can speak a little bit to the questions that you've chosen to engage athletes with and what coaches can do with that data once they have it.
Absolutely. So, research, believe it or not, mental health in sport isn't terribly widely understood. And I know that sounds a little bit, or for me anyways, I think it may be because we're gaining such a good understanding of mental health in the general public, but what we know from research, Nate, is that the way we treat and access our athletes has to be different. We can't plop on a solution that works traditionally in mental health realms onto athletics. We need to come up with solutions that are from athletics, built from athletic research, and make sure that that's how we kind of approach mental health. So based on the literature that does exist, what the research tells us is that the way, we talk to athletes and it has to be different. So we've taken, the stressors that have been identified by academic research to impact athlete mental health. And those are 6 different stressors. The last one, the 7th one, is just really getting a feel on their overall well-being and how they're doing overall. And then really kind of asking, those are the questions that we ask, our athletes. And those are the questions that are fed back to the coaches anonymously.
when you talk about those different stressors, I'm sure coaches listening without much background here are curious, what are the significant stressors for athletes that you find?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, this is probably not going to be a shock to anyone, but definitely wanting to get a sense on how they're perceiving pressure, criticism, whether that be external or internal, their level of fatigue, time constraints are another one, how they're managing relationships in their life. And the last one being kind of their level of engagement. So, how engaged are they in what they're doing, and how they're experiencing athletics, and then kind of bundling all those up, and then feeding back to the coaches that overall team score, and how the team is doing from all those different stressors.
So this is interesting to me because JP mentioned in the States here, the last 6 weeks, I think there have been 5 collegiate athletes that have taken their own lives. And that's created quite a bit of dialogue, or at least some reflection in the social media circles about what it's like to be a college athlete and the types of pressures that student athletes are facing. And I think the thing that oftentimes is overlooked from the coaching perspective, like I think, and I could be wrong about this, but there's a perspective that when we talk about mental health with kids, we're talking about a condition that they come into my team or they come into my sport and they're carrying something with them from outside the sport that affects them in the sport. What I hear you saying, and I think this is true as you start to read, some of the other college athletes that are writing about their experience and how they can understand how maybe these individuals got to that difficult place, is that there are things inherent to the sport and the way the sport is coached and constructed, their schedules, their time constraints, expectations, and the like, that can have a negative effect on their mental health. And I think sometimes we just think, oh, being in sports, that there's a safe environment and they're with a team and it's always going to be a positive effect on somebody. But what I'm guessing here is that really isn't always the case if we're not more mindful of the effect that our decisions as coaches can have on our athletes.
Yeah, yeah, well said. And I think, I have two answers. And the first is it's both, right? Human beings show up as athletes. They're not, we're not just kind of athletes, and those things that happen in life don't impact athletes, or don't impact that subgroup. So, absolutely, they come to the rink, the pitch, the court, whatever it might be. They come with stuff that's happening in their life. However, in addition to that, is also those pressures, the criticism, the juggling, the balancing of being a student athlete. And I think, the quicker that the world of athletics really starts to understand that, we're putting a tremendous amount on these young people, and how do we do a better job of supporting them? The quicker we really get to, have our athletes feel tremendously supported and thrive. And I think it's really important to not get too caught up in where it's coming from. If it's coming from home, if it's coming from school, if it's coming from sport. And what we know is that the research tells us, regardless of where it's coming from, as coaches, as those first responders, we have the power to impact. So it's not necessarily about identifying where it's coming from, but really understanding and harnessing that we have the capacity to shift it as leaders in sport.
That's really a great point there. I think I probably get caught up a little bit too much in trying to answer that question. Is this sport doing more good or is it doing more bad? And the reality is just trying to identify where we can create an environment that, helps to support, strengthen mental health and resiliency in young people. I think that's a huge piece of it.
Absolutely.
The challenge is there's lots of challenges for coaches. You're like myself. You work with lots of different coaches and teams across different sports. What are you seeing though, as far as some of the barriers that coaches face when it comes to this issue of mental health?
Yeah. So I think the first one, JP, is just, coaches, I don't know if this is a barrier, but I think it's important to reiterate just how badly they want to support and how badly they want to help. And, we really need to make sure that we're also speaking into that and honoring that, because every single coach that I've ever worked with, there's a yearning and a wanting to make that experience better for that athlete. And I think this is where it gets a little muddy for coaches is, as a society, we've been taught that it's best for us to identify the individual when it comes to mental health. It's best for us to upskill that individual. It's best for us to build resiliency in that individual. And that's all true. But there's another really important part to this, and that's the culture and the environment that that individual lives in, exists in, works in. So I think, we see our coaches really wanting to identify who is struggling, and for very, really good reason. However, really educating them around the best way to infiltrate, or the best way to support our athletes, is actually from a group perspective. So it's not necessarily who's struggling. It's how do we build up that group or that community around the individual so they feel comfortable or safe to access the support and help they need.
Yeah, and what you just shared there is why, honestly, I was so drawn to Hone, like right from the beginning. And Nate and I have had Dr. Bruce Perry, one of the world's leading trauma psychologists, on the podcast multiple times. And this is something in all his research and the readings that we've done. And I'm currently taking his course for the neurosequential model in sports. And there's just something so profound about this. I mean, we all think, like you said, like on the individual basis, and I think coaches are running around going, "What do I got to be a therapist? Like I got to sit down and do therapy sessions with my players?" Or, but Perry talks about this value of, like, him and their book, What Happened to You with Oprah. They talk about how, like, honestly, healing in community is more therapeutic than therapy itself in most cases. And it's not to say therapy isn't important, but it's to say, like, if you can be a part of a community that's giving these doses, just consistent smaller doses of connection and belonging and just this healthy environment, that's more powerful than this 1 hour once a week session with the therapist. And so that's what's so powerful about your work.
Yeah, that's exactly it. And really wanting to make sure that we're arming these coaches. Our tool, we're not asking diagnostic questions. We're not expecting them to be therapists. We're not, I get it though. I get the fear. I get the fear from them around that, and really empowering them around how they respond, not fixing it. We're not expecting or we're not asking anyone to fix it for athletes or for individuals. We're asking them to be mindful of how they respond to it.
Yeah, and so when it comes to some of this data that you're collecting, I think one of the things that some of the coaches and I did, because I was looking at some of the data of our teams, was we would see, everything's anonymous. You get that low score by that individual, and you kind of, or a couple individuals, and everybody else is doing fairly solid. It is concerning at times though, because you do want to step in there and you do want to try to help on those things like that, right? I mean, there's those moments where you like, and even coaches that maybe aren't even using Hone, I'm sure they listen to this podcast, like we hear about our players struggling. The parents might contact us, the school, and that's really challenging, because I think we're in this situation where we feel responsible to the individual.
I so get it. Our corporate group here at Hone, we use the app. And both Paula, the co-founder, and myself, we received the data, and very early on, and let's not forget, we created this. We were the ones who thought this was a great idea. And when we saw it come back, there is that, like, oh man, like, what am I doing wrong? What am I not doing? So I viscerally understand the reactions that might come and might happen when someone receives that data. But what I will say is, it certainly validated my hunches. So maybe I had a hunch that, hopefully none of my staff is listening to this, but our workloads were too much or whatever. That data validated it, right? That data totally validated it. So I think, we have these tremendous hunches and gut responses as leaders, and what the tool does in such a great way is it either tells us we're really off, which is a lot of what coaches have given us feedback around. I thought my team was struggling with pressure, but I'm looking at fatigue, and our fatigue scores are really low. So it kind of really helps us as leaders, guides us around how our people are really doing, how our athletes are doing.
I think one of the barriers and challenges for coaches when it comes to just having a general awareness of a player's mental health is that most people in our current generation of coaches were never coached in that way. We were always rub some dirt on it, toughness, you got to get through it. I got through it. You'll get through it. And so I think that makes it a little bit more difficult because we haven't experienced,
totally.
I don't want to say a touchy-feely approach necessarily, but really just an approach with an awareness of, as you mentioned, where your team is at with criticism or pressure or relationships or what have you. So if a coach were to use this tool or have, it's a diagnostic tool that it's amazing in terms of getting to know, as you just said, where your team is actually at, then what? Then what do you say to the coaches that find out that their team has a low score in that pressure area? To me, again, we might not know what the next move is. So what do coaches do,
totally.
Sometimes when they find out their team is struggling in a certain area?
Yeah, absolutely. And I always say data is so great, but it's what we do with the data that really matters. So I totally hear that. So when a coach is able to see, maybe my team is struggling in criticism, our tool actually offers suggestions and offers the coach some deliverable, actionable items that he or she can kind of move on based on where the team is scoring. So all the suggestions that we offer are based on kind of the score. So it's dynamic in the sense that it shifts and moves with the score. And in addition to that, we do offer support with our different packages as well. So if a coach is like, oh, I've tried this 3 times and it's not moving, maybe that's a really good time for us to be having that conversation around, okay, like, let's look at your data. What's working, what's not working, and being able to provide the coach that support that they need to be able to support their people or their athletes with what they need.
We, at Thrive on Challenge, we do a lot of work with teams establishing like a captain's council. And as you were just talking there, I'm thinking that's the great go-between to interpret the data of putting it in front of your leaders or your captains and saying, okay, tell me what this means. Tell me where we're actually at. Now, what should we do? What's the best way forward? Do you have coaches that are engaging their players in those kind of conversations?
Yeah, great thought. And absolutely. So we were a little hesitant, to be honest, at the beginning to kind of to go there. However, we had a few coaches and one who we really trusted and really understood the tool. And he said, I'm going to try this. I'm going to get my leadership group together. I'm going to show them the data, and then we're going to come up with solutions and ways to kind of approach this. And it was brilliant. It was a brilliant idea. And it's one that I definitely suggest to other coaches as a way to, there's so much pressure on us as coaches. And so to be able to engage and co-create with your athletes is a wonderful thing. And it takes the pressure off a little bit too. It's not all on your shoulders and not all your responsibility to have to figure out what to do next. So I think it's a brilliant strategy.
Yeah, we had some great success this year with some of our coaches using Hone and some critical adjustments that they made. One, I remember, was a high school girls basketball coach in Ohio. And, he was getting feedback around the pressure. And instantly, like you said earlier, the coach goes, oh my gosh, pressure. Is this their way of telling me I'm putting too much pressure on and this and that? And like sits down, he sat down with like the captain's council, and they're just like, no, it's like, well, we got these parents and the parents drive us crazy. Then we got the teachers and we're trying to go to college and we got AP tests and we got this and that. It's like it's life, you know what I mean? So,
Right.
and then the conversation became, well, how can basketball be a place that helps to release some of that pressure? That was kind of really powerful for them to have that conversation.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. So cool. Sport has been such a tremendous vehicle in my own life. So it's so cool to hear stories like that, JP, where, it's a vehicle for connection. It's a vehicle for developing those skills. It's amazing that, a simple tool like Hone can facilitate and really help those experiences to kind of grow and develop.
All right. Thanks to Jessica for coming to the podcast to discuss. She's back next week, and we're going to be talking about mental health and sports and culture, but we're really going to focus on data and many of the things that we've learned and some of the strategies from some of our coaches at TOC who used Hone in the last year. It's been a great partnership that we've formed with Hone, and I highly recommend you checking them out at honeathletics.com.